Hello friends, and welcome to part 19 of our FastAPI tutorial. In this video, we are going to talk about handling errors. Errors. Okay, let's just jump right into it. So you're going to have certain situations where you're going to want, you're not going to want to just have FastAPI handle the errors. You're going to want to do something. If you're building your client application as well as the server application, you might want to have certain functionality in the client that will handle said errors and will display a custom error message or something like that. You've seen in the past we've run into errors where trying to figure out what was going on could have been a little convoluted. It could have been a little difficult to try and see what to do with that error. So this is going to bother me trying to say the word error the entire time in this. So this will allow us to kind of override some of that sort of stuff and put our own custom functionality on it. You'll see. So let's just go ahead and get started. We're going to say items equals foo. The foo wrestlers. Don't know why Sebastian came up with that, but that's fine. App.get items item ID, our normal stuff. Async def read item ID is going to be a string, and if item ID not in items, we're going to raise an HTTP exception. Status code equals 404 detail equals item not found. Otherwise, we're going to return items item ID. So we are going to need to import it. We can see if I hover over this, I can import it from Starlet, HTTP client, or FastAPI. I will import it from FastAPI, but let's go up here and do it. From FastAPI, we'll import HTTP exception. Oh, and I had a typo. Status cod. There we go. Better. Let's go ahead and refresh our page. We will pull this and we will try 456. And you can see we got our error here that says not found. If we go into localhost hots items 456, that's 3,000. Why did I do 3,000 instead of 8,000? I don't know why I did 3,000. There we go. We get detail item not found. If we were to do something like this, if we were to comment this out and try and rerun it, we would see we would get this sort of internal server error. So what this allows us to do is it allows us to handle that error and return an actual value, item not found. And I apologize if you couldn't see it. It's not worth zooming in for something like that. The reason that we're raising this and we're not returning it is because, excuse me, because it's an actual exception that we want to handle. We want to do something with it. We don't want to just, you don't want to have to say, let's say we're doing this code somewhere else. We're abstracting it out and we're going to be reusing it in multiple places. You don't want to have to handle a return and say, if the dictionary key is this, then do this. If it's this, then do this. By raising it as an exception, you can put it in a try and except block as an example. Okay, what will also happen is if you raise this HTTP exception in a constituent function, so if we were to abstract this out and put it somewhere else, raising this exception would stop execution of the rest of the path operation function. It would just immediately return the error, which is what we would want to have happen. You might not see the benefit of this yet, but down the road when discussing dependencies and security, you'll see it a little bit more. So let's go ahead and type in foo and see if we can get this to run. And there we go. We get the result that we anticipated. Okay. You saw when we were importing this, we could have imported it from Starlet, or we could have imported it from FastAPI. The reason we're importing it from FastAPI is that we can actually add in custom headers. We can say headers equals X error a very nice play on words. Not play on words. That's stupid. It's not a play on words. Come on, Jeff. I don't know what it is, but it's the Foo Fighters. So that's where it comes from. Okay, now let's go ahead and refresh our page here. Try it out. 456. It doesn't really tell us anything here, but you notice down here we get our custom header that we handled down there. Okay? Okay, good. Now, let's go ahead and extend this a little bit. So we don't want to have to manually handle these sort of exceptions everywhere. You know, if you want, the purpose of a lot of what we're doing in FastAPI is code deduplication. You know, you've seen when we had the base model that we extended off of, that was to dry up your code. So what we're going to do now is we're going to extend the base exception, and we're going to create custom exception handlers. So the first thing that we'll do is we will say class unicorn exception that inherits from its exception, and we will say in the init method self.name equals name, and we have to say name as a string. Okay, perfect. Now what we're going to do is we're going to say @app exception handler, and we're going to say unicorn exception. So now, and you'll see what's going on in just a second. Okay, don't worry too much about it just yet. So what we've done is we've first created a class that extends from the base exception class. So now what we're doing is we're adding an exception handler to our app that will do something with that exception. Anytime we raise a unicorn exception, then we're going to do something with it. So let's call it unicorn exception handler. Request is going to be a request object, and our exception is going to be a unicorn exception. And we're going to return a JSON response with status code equals 418 and content equals nope message, and we'll do an F string. Oops. Exception.name did something. Excuse me. Uh-oh. I moved my mouse. Hold on a second. There goes a rainbow. I don't want to presume what Sebastian was imbibing while he was writing this documentation, but it is fantastic, whatever he was using. App.get unicorns name, and we're going to create our route. Read unicorns. Name is going to be a string. If name is YOLO, raise a unicorn exception with name equals name. Otherwise, we're going to return unicorn name is name. And we need to import request, which we will import from Starlet. And then we're going to need to import JSON response from Starlet responses. We can also import them from FastAPI, so let's just do that. Request. And from FastAPI.responses, import JSON response. Save, it should reformat, and now everything should be good to go. So let's just see what's going on right now. Okay, so we're going to hit this route. Let's refresh our page. Try it out. Blah. So we should get a good response back. Good. We get unicorn name is blah. Now if we put in YOLO, what's going to happen, you can see we're going to get the teapot error. The fun teapot error. Now, what happens here if name is YOLO, we're going to raise a unicorn exception with name equals name. Okay, so first thing that's happening is we're instantiating an instance of this unicorn exception class, where we're going to set self.name equals to the name that we're passing in. In this case, it happens to be YOLO. Okay, that's the first thing that's happening. Now what we're doing is we're adding an exception handler to our app that is running this GET request. It's running the GET request that's up here. And what will happen is when we throw a unicorn exception, we are going to handle it in our unicorn exception handler. So we're going to grab the exception via the exec instance here, and we're going to return a JSON response. So this allows us to say the status code and provide a custom message for any time we want to raise this unicorn exception. So we can have this exception raised in countless path operations. We don't have to set this up every single time we do it. Okay, if you want to add headers each time, you can do that in your custom exception handler. That's some of the benefit of doing it like this, as opposed to just putting it directly in the app or the path operation itself. So here, let me do another one. So now we're going to add in add app.exception handler, and this time we're going to do request validation error. Async def validation exception handler request exception return plain text response with the string of the exception and status code equals 400. Okay, and again, we're going to have to import these FastAPI exceptions, and this is going to come from probably from FastAPI response. So let's see, plain text response, and then from FastAPI.exceptions import request validation error. Okay, now let's add a route, app.get validation items item ID, and I'm just doing this because I don't want to have to get rid of this. I want to be able to leave this up here for when I commit. And then we're going to say, oh no, not there, async def read validation items. Item ID is going to be an int. If item ID equals 3, raise HTTP exception status code equals 418, which is our teapot error, and detail is nope, I don't like 3. Otherwise we return item ID is item ID. Okay, now let's go ahead and refresh our page. Let's go into here. We hit a 5 and we get our valid response. We type 3 and we get this. Okay, let's go back into here. Let's do validation items 3 and we get that. Okay, now let's just hold on one second. Sorry, I have a little tickle in my throat. I don't know what's going on here. So now, if we type in instead something like foo, we're going to get that. It's not going to work because we're telling it it's an item, or we're telling it's an int. But if we type it in here, you can see we get one validation error for request, path item, item ID, value is not a valid integer. Let's get rid of this, or let's comment it out for just a second and see what the response otherwise would be. It would be this. This is what I was talking about before. It's a little cryptic. You can figure out what's going on. You can see path, item ID, value is not a valid integer. But what this, oh, no, that's not what I want to do. What this allows us to do is it allows us to make something that's a little bit more human readable, that we can, you know, we can actually see and we can do something with. Okay, so that's that one. Let's add in another exception handler really quickly. Let's add in app exception handler starlet HTTP exception. Async def HTTP exception handler request exception. Return plain text response string exception.detail status code equals exception.status code. And we need to import starlet HTTP exception from starlet exceptions. Nope, that's not where it's coming from. HTTP exceptions. Come on, Jeff. Import HTTP exception as starlet HTTP exception. It's the same thing. We just need to rename it another way. Okay. Let's go ahead back down. We rerun this. Hold on, let's refresh our page right here for a second. Sorry, I had to pause for a second and just double check something. Okay, so let's continue on. So we can override the base exception handlers in any number of ways that you want to. Okay, and then we can kind of handle it however you want, you know, something like that. Okay, next we are going to use the request validation error body. Okay, let's come down here. I'm gonna have to comment this stuff out for now, just to because I'm gonna be overriding the same thing again. App.exception handler request validation error async def validation exception handler request is a request. Exception is a request validation error. Ooh, sorry. I clicked the mouse somewhere by mistake. I apologize. We're going to return a JSON response with status code is status HTTP 422 and content is JSONable encoder with detail being the errors from the exception and body being the body from the exception. Let's hit save. We're going to need to import JSONable encoder. JSONable? I don't know. From FastAPI encoders, JSONable encoder. Okay, so we now have this exception handler that's going to override any general request exception. Okay, now we're going to say class item is base, it inherits from base model. Title is a string. Size is an int. And we're going to say app.post items and then async def create item. Item is an item. Return item. Okay. Now, let's go into here, create item, and let's try sending this in with a string. Hello. Nope, I didn't want to hit enter. There. We get our unprocessable entity like we normally do, but what we also get is the actual exception body. Okay, so this is just another example of how you can extend base functionality to kind of provide a little bit more information. You can call this whatever you want to. You can call it blah, blah. And then you can have something in your front end that we'll say hello again. You can have something in your front end that will check to see if blah, blah exists in your exception body or in your exception response, whatever it is. Okay. So those are some of the ways that you can override the exception handlers. We can do. Let's see. Do I want to do one more thing? Let's see if we can add in a side effect, because sometimes you don't want to just return something to the client. Sometimes you want to actually just do something and then use the default behavior. So I'm going to again have to comment some of this stuff out. Unicorns are fine. Unicorns are great. I don't know about fine. They're fantastic. App.exceptionHandler. We're gonna have a starlet HTTP exception, async def custom HTTP exception handler request exception. Print fstring OMG and HTTP error. And we'll get the representation of the exception. And then all we're going to do, return await HTTP exception handler request exception. And we're going to have to import our HTTP exception handler from FastAPI exception handlers. Import HTTP, and we're going to import the request validation exception handler. We'll add one more and then we will call it a day. Exception handler request validation error, and we're going to say async def validation exception handler request exception print fstring OMG the client sent invalid data, and we will say exception. Return await. Oh no, I want to put that inside. Sorry about that. Return await request validation exception handler request exception. And then we will just say app.get items. Let's say blah items, because I don't remember if I commented out the things that would end up being overwritten. Item ID. Async def read items. Item ID is an int. If item ID equals 3, raise HTTP exception status code equals 418. Detail equals again nope. I don't like 3. Otherwise return item ID, item ID. Okay, let's try this again. That was a lot of typing. I'm a fast typer sometimes, only sometimes. Try it out. 3. We got exactly what we anticipated getting, but look, we got this. OMG and HTTP error. If we go in here, we're going to use blah items. We'll say blah items. And for foo, again, you remember we're not handling this in a plain text response. We could have, that would have been fine. But all we're looking for right now is a side effect. Right now we're printing this out. We're showing this. Client sent invalid data, one validation error for request, and then it actually prints out the string representation of it. This is good, not necessarily for printing to your standard output, but this you could use this for logging or something like that. That's where this sort of thing would be beneficial. Okay, that is it now. That was a long video. We made up for the very short video of the last one. So, you know, if you're watching in a playlist, I apologize for the lack of consistency. In the next video, we are going to get into path operation configuration a little bit more. This is going to be more for organizing your routes, grouping things like that. Really setting up some documentation using the Swagger docs a lot better. You can see here it says default. We're going to be able to kind of group these things into different groupings here. So I will see you then.